Welcome to the Next Normal podcast. We engage in conversations with experts from various industries to help you to future-proof yourself in a rapidly changing world. My name is Alecia Maragh, and I'm joined by my co-host, Maria Vassiliou. Our guest today is Isaac Olowolafe. He is the founder of Dream Maker Developments, which specializes in locating land development opportunities in growth areas. He's also the founder of Dream Maker Ventures, which is an organization that invests in entrepreneurs and innovative technologies.
Today's discussion revolves around the future of real estate and real estate investing, particularly in a Canadian context. Because our conversation was so in-depth, we decided to turn this episode into a two-parter. This episode will focus on government involvement and support systems currently in place. We hope you enjoy it. Isaac, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
So Isaac, tell us about your journey into real estate.
Thank you. Yeah, so my journey into real estate is going on almost 20 years now. I was first born in Nigeria. I came to Toronto with my parents when I was 4 years old. We lived in Toronto, Martin Grove and Albion. And then the big shift in environment came from when we moved from Martin Grove and Albion to Woodbridge. So this would have been when I was turning 16. So that was sort of my first exposure to different communities, the Italian community, which again, there was a predominant sense on home ownership, construction, real estate. It was also around the same time my dad was getting into real estate as a real estate broker. Fast track into, I was 20 years old, was at the University of Toronto. And it was at that time that I decided to launch my first company, Dream Maker Realty, and also pursue owning my first property. My parents already had secured my financing for school and tuition for school. So I couldn't really go to them to buy a property to help finance my first property. So I took it from the tuition reimbursement and my first job that I had working at UPS. So I was doing the midnight shift at UPS from 12 to 4 a.m. every day for almost 3 years. And with the money that I saved from that was what I used to buy my first and second property at the age of 21. And then since then, got my real estate license and then just grew into the career of real estate.
Amazing. And it definitely shows drive. We have a saying in Jamaica that if you want good, you know it's have to run, which means you have to put in the energy and the effort if you want something. And it sounds like you've done that. So you've mentioned your dad's influence and you mentioned that you've been in the space for some 2 decades. So you would have seen the impact of the last recession. Could you walk us through some of the conversations that you're having today in your circle of real estate investors about that twin crisis of both COVID-19 and the climate emergency on the sector, using the last recession as kind of your guiding point?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And one thing when I got into real estate, it wasn't really from a sales perspective. It was always about from a fundamentals. So when we talk about fundamentals, we always say, okay, what's happening in that location that we're buying real estate in? Because real estate is a very location-driven product. So if you look at downtown Toronto, we always ask ourselves, okay, what investments are going into the city? Is there any subway expansion? Is there any school coming to that area? Is there private sector investments? Is there public sector investments? When I bought my land across of Yorkdale Mall, that would have been around 2008, 2009. Again, just sort of coming out of a soft recession as well too, but there was a lot of good fundamentals around that location. So what were those fundamentals? Well, the city announced a subway expansion from Yorkdale Mall to right up to York University. The city announced the first digital hospital at 401 in Keele. Oxford announced almost $1 billion renovation will be happening in one of the largest luxury malls in North America. And then obviously Canada said their immigration practice they're gonna continue to increase immigration happening into the city. So because of all those key fundamentals, regardless of what was happening, externally in the marketplace, we felt on the long-term growth, there was still good value in buying real estate. So using those best practices, we're analyzing what's happening right now. It's a different climate. because when you have your typical recession, it's more focused on economics, macro and microeconomics. But with COVID, now you're incorporating health into it. So the reactions of that is a little bit different. We know there's a lot of investors sitting on the sidelines. There's a lot of buyers and sometimes sellers too, sitting on the sidelines trying to figure out what's going to actually happen. So because of the lack of uncertainty, that's where this period is a little bit different from the previous recession. What's been supported and sort of good on both sides, depending on how you're looking at it, is how active the government has been in terms to level the playing field or soften the blow that's going to happen from an economic point of view. But then the flip side to that is there's been billions of dollars, almost $300 billion worth of capital deployed. So now it's figuring out how is that going to be paid back. We haven't seen the real impacts of COVID because it's not totally gone yet, right? So, like we always talk about a tornado, when a tornado is coming, you typically wait until the tornado passes before you come outside and see the damages. The tornado hasn't fully passed yet, so we don't know what the full impact of the damages are. But what is clear is that Toronto is still a strong city, top city in the world, and Canada still has an interest in increasing their immigration benchmarks based on what the Minister of Immigration announced a couple of weeks ago. Those different factors will help to drive the recovery once the recovery does happen.
I'm glad that you brought up the government factor in terms of everything that's going on, in terms of them softening the impact of COVID, in terms of like what's going on. We did speak with Abdullah Snabar recently, and I know you did an interview with him for RBC Disruptors podcast. In the episode we did with Abdullah, he spoke to how the government has really stepped up in terms of supporting small businesses and entrepreneurs during this time, especially. When it comes to the future of real estate and, for example, tenant-landlord relations, where and how do you see the government coming into play when it comes to being a mediator between the two? And how would you say the recent situation with COVID has been handled in terms of the real estate market and the government's support?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think the government is obviously put in a very tough position right now. We see it with our rental properties on the residential side, our rental properties on the commercial side. The government has the tenant board is not taking in any applications right now. So, for tenants that want to take advantage of that, they could, in terms of not paying their rent and knowing that there's no actual actions that could be taken on them in terms of the typical actions of going to the tenant board and going through that process. And the government had to step in and sort of make provisions for the tenants, because it would have been a very bad situation if they didn't, in terms of landlords forcing tenants out, even though majority of the tenants were impacted by the COVID situation. And I think overall, the government has done their best that they could, considering the situation. Now the government needs to really figure out what they could do to make sure that both the landlords and the tenants are able to come to some equal ground, because there's so many different factors when you look at just the landlord and the tenants. The landlords has to deal with investors and lenders and the bank that have the mortgages on the property. And the tenants, obviously, they would love to be paying the rent, but because of, they're only getting, let's say, the $2,000 supplement that's coming in every month. Sometimes that's not enough, especially if you're looking at Toronto. The average one bedroom is $2,000. So, 2 bedrooms and plus, that's not enough to cover. And then what about actually living? Like, how do you support other expenses? So it's definitely a tough situation on both sides. I think some type of subsidies should be required, should be handed down to landlords on the residential and the commercial side. I know the government has tried through various applications and programs. I think pay to 75%, pay 25% upfront, and the government will cover the balance, or a program where the tenants pay 50% and the government pays the other 50%. But what we've seen from few of our other investors that have properties is the process of filling in those applications is pretty long. and it's not something that could be handled right away. Even though mortgage payments, interest payments are still demanded on the first of the month. So I think it's a unique situation that the government is doing their best to tackle it. I think there's still more work that needs to be done, and bringing those different bodies together, the government, the tenant, and the landlords, and coming up with a solution that's a win-win for all parties, knowing that there is no perfect solution in something like this.
Do you see the need to involve, for example, the investors and the banks that you mentioned in that conversation? And if so, like, how do you see that coming about?
Yeah, because I think all of it has an impact, right? It's not as simple as saying, tenants don't have to pay right now. Landlords can't kick out any tenants. We're not allowing the process of the tenant board to be open right now. There's so many other factors from the banks, like I said, the lenders, investors, the city, sometimes permitting, right? So because of those different factors, it wouldn't be right to make to put together programs without taking those into consideration, and without asking, well, if we do this program, which will impact payments of rent, how does that impact you, bank? How does that impact you, private lender, right? Because I know the banks have come up with different deferral programs. That's totally different from a private lender, right? So I think it's always good to have parties that are going to be impacted directly and indirectly involved with the conversation before a program is rolled out, because it just makes the situation much difficult.
A lot of people don't realize the butterfly effect is very real, and they
Correct.
have to look at things holistically, not just in individual silos.
Exactly.
And on that note of bringing all the stakeholders to the table and having a conversation together, that's more holistic. I just wanted to learn a little bit more about, we've seen statements from companies like Facebook and Shopify and Twitter and BMO indicating that they're either going to be facilitating either remote work, exclusively so, or hybrid work as part of their modus operandi going forward. I'd love to understand more about what that means for the impact on prime property in downtown, particularly for Bay Street. I'd also, as a part B of the question, because I have to throw as much into one question as possible, what does that mean for the office as we know it today? We're so used to these open plan layouts, and with COVID-19, as you mentioned, being a health issue, what does that also mean for how we understand the office?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. In regards to commercial real estate and vacancy, definitely vacancies will spike up for commercial real estate, retail real estate, space, offices. But from what I've been hearing with different investors and landlords in the office space, they see also a need for them to actually get more space as well too. Because there will still be a role for individuals, employees to come into the work. It may not be as needed as every day, Monday to Friday, but there will still be some need for that to happen when clients want to come into the office, or when there's board meetings, executive meetings, partners meeting. But maybe more space would now be required. You probably wouldn't see rows of cubicles, but you see more open. It's just like 5 to 10 years, when the Googles and the Facebooks and the co-working space, that whole theme came into the office space. You saw offices change a little bit as well too, in terms of a typical office. When you saw the way some of the tech offices were set up, they were set up a little bit different from the way a corporate financial office was set up. So I definitely still see in the long haul, still strong demand for office space, and vacancy stabilizing a bit. But in the short term, definitely you'll see that impact on vacant rates.
And so can I imagine that in the medium term, if I am walking down Bay Street, it will go back to being this happening, buzz in place with lots of professionals and corporate persons walking down, or are we worried a little bit that it won't have the vibrancy that it had before because less people will be coming in and working more will be working from home?
I think from a Toronto's perspective, or just in general, I still think there will be that vibrant space. And again, when you look at Toronto as a whole, as a city that's growing, more and more companies are coming here, setting up offices. More and more tech companies are setting up offices, are being built up, are growing. I think as a result of those indirect impacts, you'll always still see Toronto buzzing as a major city because it's growing. Right now, maybe other cities that don't have that type of growth, don't have that type of immigration drive, don't have that type of growth from corporations that want to set up new offices, don't have that growth from tech companies that are growing in scale. They may suffer from a buzzing downtown core, but I think Toronto in the medium to long term will get back to sort of not fully like pre-COVID, but definitely you'll still see that activity and traction happening within the downtown core.
So positive outlook for Toronto in the medium term.
Yeah, definitely positive outlook.
In a general sense, I have a few friends that work in office spaces and predominantly in agencies. And a few of them have actually noted that their boss or their CEO has decided to get rid of their office space, and they're going to be pivoting more towards going to co-working spaces. So they're becoming a completely remote team. Do you see us kind of going back to that? Like, I know a few years ago it was very popular to be part of a co-working space. Do you see a lot of companies going into that direction more?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Again, and it depends on the business and the space. As more and more tech companies grow, I definitely see them incorporating more co-working space, just like they were doing pre-COVID. And other companies and other industries may follow suit as well too. So I definitely don't think the co-working space is gonna die. I think that it will actually grow, but the way the spaces are gonna be designed will probably require even more space. Because you typically can't just ram as many companies and desks into a physical location. You would probably need to space it out more, probably need to have more individually group sections. So as a result of that, you're going to actually need more real estate. So this is why we were saying that, there will be sort of a short dip on office space, but as companies are figuring out how to work with the new post-COVID of employees that are working from home and some that are working in the office, we'll have to figure out how to restructure, re-architect their office designs, which most likely will require more space.
This was part one of a two-parter episode. Join us for our next episode of the Next Normal podcast, where we dive deeper into the post-COVID world of real estate.